Hello, Adam Fairclough here once more for HDTV test to take a gander at another game in HDR. It seems like only yesterday that Monster Hunter World released and burned all of our eyes out with its strange HDR, but it turns out that was over a year and a half ago. Where's the time go? Anyways, Monster Hunter World Iceborne came out last week and brought some changes to the HDR, and people have been asking me to take a look. So here I am, back once more like a terrible English rash. So back when Monster Hunter World was released, it was dubbed as having fake HDR. Essentially, the SDR grade was stretched all the way to 5000 nits, meaning that everything was just too bright, blown out, and even shadows were light. We now know that this shares something in common with a number of other problem games. The in-game tone mapper, as it wasn't really fit for use in a game with an HDR output. So the bad news is, I suspect that the game still uses the same basic tone mapper, but the good news is that the in-game settings have been retooled, and this allows users to manipulate the tone mapping to achieve something that looks more appropriate and overcome the problems that we saw, along with making the game look the same as the previous titles. The style is retained. Booting up the game, I actually noticed something rather unusual. Normally HDR is engaged as soon as the game is booted, however Iceborne doesn't actually engage it until several logos into the boot sequence, something we see in several PS4 titles such as Spider-Man and Gran Turismo Sport. Perhaps this is a change to the Xbox software development kit, and this might open the doors in future for in-game toggles. However, games simply having good HDR outputs in the first place negates the need to turn it off anyway. So over in the video settings screen we have these three settings: brightness, colour and contrast. Let's look at brightness. The game defaults to 4, but what is this scale and what effect does it have on the game? Well, the two images here actually give us a good indication of how it will look in a brighter and a darker scene. Increasing it makes everything brighter, but you'll see that the dark areas unfortunately become lighter. This setting moves the white point or adjusts gain, which is similar to increasing contrast on your display. This is exactly what the setting did in Monster Hunter originally, and we've seen in several other problem titles such as Red Dead Redemption 2 and Nier Automata. Fortunately, we can offset for this with the new contrast setting, but we'll come to that shortly. The default 4 setting actually brings the game's brightest points up to around about 780 nits, which for many is going to be plenty. However, for others, depending on your display and what it's doing, may still present an overall image that isn't entirely practical to use, and you may even find it's a little bit too dim. So I've done the hard work for you and have taken measurements for some common values that display mappers use. I'd recommend you set the one closest to the peak display tone mapping value that you normally use. If you're not sure what to use, or you don't have a game with a reliable output, I'd recommend you go grab the new demo for FIFA 2020, which has a full 10,000 nit HDR 10% window scale. To use this, disengage any dynamic processing you have turned on your display, particularly dynamic contrast and dynamic tone mapping. You can turn those on again afterwards if you insist. Starting at the very lowest value, slowly increase the scale until the first point where the left and right hand side of these boxes become the exact same shade of white. For me, this changes as I move between 24 and 25. This indicates that the 25 value, just stick 2 zeros on the end of that, 2,500 nits, is the value that my display maps to my display's physical peak brightness. Write down this value and you can use it for any game. So for Monster Hunter, find the value closest to what we just found, preferably probably slightly under, and just run with that. Then this will ensure that the brightest things in the game are as bright as your display can handle. Things like the sun, magic and fire will all use this. Next up is the contrast setting, which defaults to 16. Now, I spent a long time trying to figure out exactly what this was doing, and it's doing one of two things. It's either adjusting the video levels and grey point, or it's directly interfacing with the game's Reinhardt tone mapper. Either way, it means that there isn't necessarily a right value, but I feel that somewhere between 18 and 22 worked well for me, and this setting will allow you to darken the shadows, especially if you've had to use a higher brightness value. You can take this all the way up to 30 with kind of no ill effect. However, you might just find, as I did, that's just a little bit too contrasty and isn't particularly comfortable for play. As for the colour, again, set this in a way that looks good to you. The world is fantastical and cartoon-like, with a really heavy magenta grade in the shadows. So without many real-world references to match against, who's to say that the colour of magic is not quite right? But If you do want to look at something, maybe take a look at the blue sky in the game on a sunny day and see whether it looks too blue and too saturated for you. The game's mostly operating in a Rect 709-esque colour gamut, with the lighting pipeline generating colour further off into BT 2020 in certain situations. As you increase the colour and the saturation, it will push this a little bit further out into WCG. Monster Hunter Iceborne is a very magical looking game, and despite its anime root, does sometimes have a quite naturalistic, relaxing and serene quality, especially moving through the expedition areas with the wild animals and the monsters roaming freely. That's before you slaughter the monsters, of course. It's not quite so serene then. The improvements that have come with the Iceborne update are certainly worthwhile, and there's no need to disable the HDR anymore to get a comfortable image. The game provides enough scope to create an output that presents some of the benefits that come from a 10-bit HDR output. If you found this video useful and would like the channel to continue making these types of videos, please click the like button. If you'd like to be notified about future videos, please subscribe and then hit the bell icon. Thanks for watching.